Hey guys, thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I appreciate your time once again. And we're going to continue. I had a few extra things I wanted to add on to my video I made last night about RAYSHARD Brooks and Garrett Rolfe and the shooting that occurred at the Wendy's that we're all familiar with now, that is now burned to the ground in the Atlanta, Georgia area. As always, if you look down my page there, I appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel, The Polemagetic. Hit the like button if you like this video, and leave any comments or questions in the section below there, and I will get to them if I can. If I leave anything out, if there's information that's significant or relevant to this story here, or this video, or the things I'm going to talk about, please add that down below, because I'm trying to gather more information as this goes. So, RAYSHARD Brooks and Garrett Rolfe. Garrett Rolfe and Devin Brosnan have now turned themselves in to the Atlanta Police Department. I believe Brosnan is bailed out or is on bond, and Garrett Rolfe is in custody, and he's currently in jail, awaiting his trial, at least for right now. And so, what I wanted to add some extra thoughts onto the last video was a couple things. First of all, I wanted to talk about the criminal history aspect. I've seen people putting up comments about, what does somebody's criminal history have to do with anything? What does the history have to do with anything? Well, history actually can bear a lot of relevant, valuable data that could bear significant influence on a current situation. However, in this incident here at Wendy's, the Officer Rolfe and Officer Brooks, RAYSHARD Brooks, their actions have to be evaluated in this moment in the eyes of the law, not simply because of what they did in the past. Now, what they did in the past can affect their actions and why they decided to do whatsoever, or what they did in these moments. I kind of wonder why all of a sudden RAYSHARD Brooks decided to just snap. For the last, the first 20, 40 minutes, or whatever it is, he was real nice, kind, said he didn't want to really refuse anything they were asking him to do. And then the moment they went to cuff him, it's like he just became a brand new Mr. Brooks. What happened? Why the change? History can play a role, but however, either way, in that moment, we have to evaluate their actions based on the law as far as, did they commit criminal acts here? So here's the point I'm getting at, is that it doesn't, if you're going to bring up criminal history, or if you're going to bring up someone's history period, you have to do it for both sides. You can't just bring up one guy's history and say, well, the other person, we're going to scratch that and we're not going to give any attention to his history, but this guy over here, we need to look into his past. Well, that's not necessarily true. If you're looking at the situation, Officer Rolfe was acting as an officer, and look at these stories here. This is Alive 11, which is a local channel in Atlanta, and you'll see on Alive 11 that let me see. Well, no, we'll just go with this. Alive 11, though, they have here these counts or these stories they put up in the last few days considering Officer Rolfe, and notice the headlines of the article. Officer in RAYSHARD Brooks case previously accused of cover-up in separate incident years before fatal shooting. So they're bringing up something that they said was years before this night, 5 or 6 nights ago, and they said he was accused of a cover-up. Okay, let's look at this story here. Officer, that's talking about Rolfe. Officer who fatally shot RAYSHARD Brooks has been investigated 12 times by Atlanta Police Department Standards Office. So once again, bringing up Officer Rolfe's history, right? Now, here's the point I'm going to get at here, is that look at RAYSHARD Brooks when it comes to Alive 11, again, local Atlanta station. They say, what do we know about RAYSHARD Brooks? Well, here's the story they have here, and here's some of his family members. Of course, family is going to speak pretty much 99.9% of the time, as far as my experience has been. Family always speaks good about you, and not necessarily meaning that it's not true, but the report that they have on RAYSHARD Brooks is talking about his family, his kids. He had family, brothers, sisters, big cousins. He went to get a snack, and let's see here. That boy wasn't out there breaking any crimes. He just went to get a bite to eat and fell asleep, and so forth. This is the story that we have about RAYSHARD Brooks. So you kind of getting an idea, and you can look over, and I would ask you all, if you want to go to their website, or any website, especially the local channels. I prefer the local news. They'll give you more details than the national syndicated ones will. But do a search for RAYSHARD Brooks, for Garrett Rolfe, and you'll see, here's some of the results I've come up with, but nothing that really has a headline showing anything about RAYSHARD Brooks' history. Now, those of you who already may have looked have realized that RAYSHARD Brooks definitely has a significant criminal history. Now, here's the point. Is that bear any significance? If it doesn't, if it's simply because, hey, that's in the past, well, then I'd say, okay, let's be fair and justice. Let's be fair and just and say, well, then let's leave Officer Rolfe's past out of it as well. Well, he's an officer. He's in the situation here and he's an officer. Okay, so if Officer Rolfe was being an officer in this in the shooting of RAYSHARD Brooks, he was an Atlanta officer and he was in the role of an officer in this incident, and so therefore let's look at his history as an officer. Okay, then likewise we should look into RAYSHARD Brooks's criminal history because he was behaving and acting as a criminal. He was a criminal in this incident. Number one, he robbed an officer of his firearm, his tasers to be specific. He disarmed an officer. That is a felony. He was a felon in this moment. If he had no history, he had become a felon before he was shot right here in the Wendy's parking lot. So again, the point is, if you're going to bring up one guy's history, you can't bring up just RAYSHARD Brooks, can't bring up just Officer Rolfe's history. Bring them both up or leave them out altogether. However, I would say bring up the history that is relevant to these events here that may explain certain behaviors, certain decisions, certain actions that we see and that we know that had occurred. But the actions themselves have to be weighed in light of the law in this moment. So you can't say he's guilty of a crime because in the past he was investigated for 12 incidents of this or that as an officer, or he's guilty of this crime because he has a felony record in the past as well. No, you have to look at what he did in a moment. So the history can be relevant, but it doesn't necessarily judge them in this moment. What judges them in the moment is the law at the time that they committed these crimes. And so I want to X that out here. And here's an interesting story. Let me bring this up here too. This is the second thing I wanted to get to, and that's the idea of the taser being considered a deadly weapon or not. Here is the prosecuting DA for Fulton County, Paul Howard. He's the one who is prosecuting Officer Garrett Rolfe, and also Devin Brosnan. Now, let me look at something here. He's involved in a case. You may look at it in the past 2 weeks. I think it was back on June 2nd. He put charges forward on, I believe it was 5 or 6 officers in Atlanta who used a taser on 2 college students. Many of y'all may have been quite familiar with the videos. There's actually good body cam footage you can see what's going on, where these officers had used their tasers on college students, a couple college students in a car. They opened the doors up and they fired the tasers on the college students. And he's prosecuting those officers, and at least 2 of them, I think several more, perhaps, they're also being charged with aggravated assault. And because they used the taser on these students, they didn't use their pistol, they used a taser. I want you to listen to this because this was June 2nd when he brought these charges forward. I want you to listen how he described this a taser in this context here. This was what's this? We're at June 18th. So this is 16 days ago. Watch this.
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia. Under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
Okay, a taser is considered, this is from the DA himself, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law. Now, he could be wrong, he could be right. I'm not certain of that because he himself is not the arbiter of Georgia law. So he may be mistaken, but he did say here that a taser under Georgia law is considered a deadly weapon. And now I want you to keep that in mind, okay?
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon.
Okay, so notice this here, stun gun laws in Georgia. The projectile, and you can read this whole page for yourself if you want. I didn't see exactly where he grabbed this from, but anyway, look at this here. The projectile type stun gun is considered a firearm and is regulated by the same laws that govern the use of other types of weapons. Now, we saw last night in my other video where I showed you under Georgia code that a stun gun or a firearm, in this case a projectile type stun gun, that's a taser. Projectile meaning it blasts out the leads that come out, the little prongs, and they insert, they puncture the skin and then, send the charge through that way. This Georgia stun gun law says that the projectile type, which is what was used in the case of RAYSHARD Brooks, that's what Officer Rolfe and Officer Brosnan had armed at the time, and it was considered a firearm, a type like that. We saw that last night according to Georgia Code in my other video. Firearm permit is not needed for a person to carry a stun gun. Stun gun is where you basically have to push the stun gun itself up against the body of the person. Those like the old school ones that, well, they still use those now, of course. But you have to push them up against. You have to do what they call like a dry stun, I believe it is. Firearms permit is required, however, to carry a projectile stun gun. So consider. Keep watching this here.
Under Georgia law.
63. 63.
Let me run this back.
Considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
63.
So you see this? Watch right when he shoots it. Okay, I want you to watch. I'm going to run this back a few times. You can see Officer Rolfe. This is, I kind of pointed it out last night. I want to point it out again. You can see right when RAYSHARD turns around and fires the stun gun, fires the taser, and you can see Officer Rolfe drop his taser and draw his weapon and his pistol. Now watch this. Right there. See that? Right there. Drop his pistol. Drop his taser. Drop it. Drop the taser. See, he falling to the ground. Okay. So you can see right there where he drew his weapon right when RAYSHARD fired the taser back at Officer Rolfe. You can see the Officer Rolfe at that point drop his taser on the ground because he's drawing his pistol out at that point to use his pistol now. So let's keep watching this here.
63.
And there's the clear shot. You can see the burst.
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
63.
So here's a good slow motion account of it. Again, watch this and watch the details here, folks. Here comes RAYSHARD. There he goes, putting it back, pointing it at Officer Rolfe. That's definitely within range to hit somebody with a taser right there. Absolutely. Matter of fact, up to this point, he had been tasing RAYSHARD as he was running away. The taser was actually in. He actually had landed that the leads into RAYSHARD just wasn't working. He wasn't being tased in a way that it incapacitated him. So you can see right here. Here's the taser in Officer Rolfe's left hand, and you see his right arm is now pointing down with his hand on his pistol. He's getting ready to drop. He has his hand like he's ready to use his pistol, and you'll see him drop the taser right here. Watch. There it goes to the ground, and he's drawing his weapon out. And now he's going to fire. All of that immediately on the back of RAYSHARD drawing the pistol, or drawing the firearm, according to Georgia law, or taser, and shooting it. Shooting it at Officer Rolfe. So you'll see here, yeah, they say there's 1.2 seconds from Brooks starting to turn back to deploy. Yeah, he had a just, split second. I mean, it was quick for him to have the time that he needed to respond. In those moments, they don't really have, and so that's where people need to understand here we are, hindsight's 2020, right? You can't analyze the situation in the moment. That's why a lot of these officers are trained to follow protocols, so they respond according to a protocol, because you can't just simply stop and say, well, hold up. Let me see what's going on here before I decide. You don't have the time to do that. Your safety's at risk. You have to think immediately before, or else you're dead. That's the point. And so we can watch a little bit more here. And so there we go, finishing off that.
Is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
Right. Firearm is considered a deadly weapon under Georgia law. So that's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because in that situation, whoops, well, you'll see that there. We'll leave that now. That's going to be interesting how that plays out, because District Attorney Howard has said 2 weeks ago that a taser is a deadly weapon when the officer was using it on those college students. Now you have the case where RAYSHARD Brooks used that same taser. I'm guessing it's the same issue taser, same model, because it was Atlanta Police Department. I'm guessing, just guessing. But now when that taser was in the hands of a felon, we just saw where he assaulted a police officer in this scene. He assaults the police officer, disarms a police officer. That's felony. And then he runs off and now shoots the taser. The same district attorney that said that was a deadly weapon now has said that what RAYSHARD Brooks did not pose as an imminent threat to Officer Rolfe. So in the case of the college students, he said that's a deadly weapon being used, and it's aggravated assault, the charge, aggravated assault. In this case now, if he's going to be consistent, he's going to have to say RAYSHARD Brooks used a deadly weapon. At the same time, though, Officer Rolfe was not being exposed to an imminent threat. I'd like to see how that's going to play out, because it's a deadly weapon or not. It very well can be, and it can be considered deadly in that it can kill somebody. Taser can, but more so if you look at my other video, my last one I was talking about, I said how a taser can incapacitate an officer to where now his firearm is exposed. He can't protect it anymore. His safety is now exposed. And because of that, he has a right to keep those things and maintain those things. He has a right to maintain his own safety and to maintain domain or control over his firearm. And if that's at a risk, he has the right to defend that using the force necessary. Remember, we saw that according to the Atlanta Police Department policy. The force that is necessary, not can't go over and above. That's excessive force. But he can use the necessary force to maintain that. In this case, RAYSHARD Brooks was using a taser. So Officer Rolfe has to step above the level of a taser, which the next step up from the taser is his pistol. And now he has to use that to secure control of the scene. And that's why he drew his weapon. Also, if he perceived that he had an imminent threat at that moment, which goes back to the Atlanta Police Department policy that we looked at in the other video. Those things are going to have to play out. Was he justified in believing that? That's going to be played out in the courtroom. I think, once again, so far, this was a clean shoot. I don't think that, it's unfortunate that he died. I get that. And, because now he's got a widow and little kids now that don't have the dad at all. He can't be their dad at all anymore. He's gone. But at the same time, he turned around and fired a taser, which a deadly weapon. It's a firearm. Shot that within range to an officer, and the officer therefore dropped his taser at that point and drew his pistol and to say execute his pistol. I shouldn't say, I don't mean like execute it like that, but he shot his pistol and used that. And so that's what happened in this case. And what do you think about that? I mean, do we say that RAYSHARD Brooks was just running away? Because the fact of the matter was that RAYSHARD Brooks was running away, but when he turned his torso sideways to point that taser, he was now engaging the officer once again. He was not just simply fleeing the scene. He was still engaging the officer with a deadly weapon, according to Mr. Howard. I'll just say that Georgia Code says he was engaging the officer with a firearm. And if that's the case, I don't see any reason why Officer Rolfe did not have a reason to draw his pistol at that point. Going above, you have to go, remember, the officer has to go above whatever force is being used by a criminal or whoever's using force against him. And so those are kind of my thoughts on this. I just wanted to add those in. What do you think? Again, put your thoughts in the comments below if you would like, or anything I've left out that's relevant information. Because, again, I'm trying to gather these things together, trying to gather more information, and we'll see how this plays out. Always, as always, it's really a sad thing that this had to happen, because it started off so good, so well, and I just wish Mr. Brooks would have just allowed things to just play out, and took the DUI and did what was right, and served whatever penalty he had to do in order to do what was right in the eyes of the law. And perhaps he could have been still alive right now. I would think he would be, but we'll see how this turns out, and we hope for the best. And thank you for taking the time to watch the video. And I will see you on the next one. Take care.